Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people, where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. First of all, I wanted to take this time and say thank you to Joseph Leaks from the Blind Table Talk podcast. He posted just a few days ago about this guy named Zach Tidwell pushing past possibility and pushing past possible. And I had never heard of you before. I had never heard of your podcast before, but now that I have, I definitely am ready to hear your whole journey. And as I said, tell everything you want me to know and don't tell anything you don't want me to know. I've looked into you a little bit, but I don't know much. But I just want you to speak from the bottom of your soul and tell this whole journey. So the microphone is yours. Go right ahead. Absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't know that Joseph posted about me. So, my name is Zach Tidwell, and I'm a 29-year-old Marine Corps veteran, and I am completely blind and deaf in one ear. So, grew up with totally normal sight, totally normal body, and I lost my sight almost 6 years ago now to a suicide attempt. I was struggling with depression after I got out of the Marines from a bad combination of personal circumstances, head injuries, and what ultimately boils down to a lack of healthy coping skills. And I spiraled after a motorcycle accident and developed a drinking problem. And a year later, wound up shooting myself in between the eyes. And that's what took my sight and my hearing. But I had to relearn how to do literally everything, but now I am an award-winning software developer, making the digital world a more accessible place for everyone. I'm about to finish the second draft of my memoir that dives into all of these things that I've been through and really highlights these difficult topics that people don't tend to talk about, with depression and suicide and substance abuse. And I have my own podcast called Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell, which is not a blindness related podcast, though it is in the title. I'm helping my listeners learn through the experiences of others, whether my guests are people with stories of overcoming like mine, or lessons hard learned, or movers and shakers out in the world doing big things.
Your story really, really resonates well with me, and it truly does. So let me just kind of break the ice with you a little bit more and say that I'm 33 years old. I was born blind. And the first important thing to note here when we talk about blindness, right, is you have people who are born blind like me, and then there are people like you, such as yourself, who have become blind later in life. And it seems, and I know, and I've come to understand and learn that it is a huge challenge to learn how to be a blind person. It's completely different, you know? I had challenges growing up dealing with being a blind person, going through schooling and getting an education and things like that, certainly. But I will say, though, that I cannot, obviously, I'm not going to compare my challenges to yours in any sense of the imagination and any stretch of the imagination. Very interesting, by the way, that you served in the Marines. By the way, thank you for your service. By the way, serving in the military was always, as a child and teenager, one of my interests, actually. And I never got to do that because I'm blind. But that's okay. That's life. But I certainly am familiar with that and aware of it, and appreciative that you made that choice to serve our country and do the right thing. So, it seems to me like, Zach, you've learned a lot of lessons along the way after you got out of the Marines about coping and about, included to and encapsulated in your suicide attempt. It seems to me that you've learned a lot about yourself as a blind person now. So what are some things that you have noticed, and what are some specific things that you've learned about coping and coping skills? And I don't just mean it for you. I mean it for all of us in the blindness community, because all of us need to come together and be able to cope a little bit better. It's a life skill. What do you think?
Yeah, and there's absolutely a story that can go along with this too. But
you may add the story. As I said, it's marked as explicit for a reason. You may add the story if you want.
Yeah, I'm just
Go for it.
it's been March 31st will be 6 years since I shot myself. So after I was taken off of life support is when I found out that I not only not succeeded in killing myself, but I had maimed myself forever. And like I said, I had to relearn how to do everything. It was sitting up in bed to learning how to use the bathroom again, to brushing my teeth. It was literally everything. But I I had all of a sudden a clear mind, at least I think just because I was so busy with everything. I mean, it was appointments all day, every day for the 51 days that I was in the hospital. And that was just in terms of the bare bones stuff of, okay, how are you going to feed yourself and stuff like that. So the thing I was kind of forced into immediately after shooting myself was therapy. And the reason that I wound up where I was at was because I wasn't speaking up. I had it in my mind that because I was a machine gunner in the Marines and just suffering in silence and gritting my teeth through things worked for me in the deadliest conventional fighting force on earth. And I thought that would work for my mental health stuff too. And I didn't really take into account the impact that my motorcycle accident had, which was the brain injury that kind of sent me spiraling because I'd come back from my second deployment and found out that my wife was cheating on me. And then shortly after shortly after we separated was when I was in the motorcycle accident and really started to spiral. But throughout that motorcycle accident was in March of 2018. I was honorably discharged because I'd finished my enlistment in August of 2018 and then shot myself in March of the following year. But that whole time I wasn't speaking up and I was trying to self-medicate with alcohol instead. And this is a very common, the not speaking up thing is very common in the military for sure. That's why there's a suicide epidemic in general, but when I got out of the Marines, the number was 22 American veterans a day were killing themselves. And I never found numbers to back this. I was told that it had reached as high as 40 during COVID. And I don't know what it's at now. It's hard because the numbers that are released on that are released by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And obviously that number going up doesn't look great on them. So makes you kind of wonder where those numbers are coming from. But all that is to say that speaking up was the first learning point for me. And I was forced to process and start working through all of those things while I was in the hospital. But in doing that, I was still so busy because I was relearning how to do everything. And after I was done in the hospital for 51 days and after my facial reconstruction surgery, I got sent to blind rehab for 2.5 months. But the other component of recovering and starting to talk through things, and I ultimately wouldn't recognize the value of talking through things until later on, but 8.5 months after I shot myself, I was back in the Rocky Mountains snowboarding. And that was something that I did when I could see and I loved and was one of my favorite things to do. And so getting back into that completely blind was huge for me. It was the first taste of independence that I had. And I think that's another thing that I've seen some snippets of in our community where people don't really push for independence as hard as I think they ought to. And I think some of that might be because they're not aware of all these possibilities that are out there. And that's why I talk about all the stuff that I do, today. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but with the software development piece that I talked about, I taught myself how to do that after losing my sight and getting back into college and realizing how inaccessible the digital world was. I started researching why so many things were inaccessible, and I decided to become part of the solution. So I dropped out of college and started teaching myself how to code. And that, I've chosen to create this opportunity for myself in a professional capacity, but also with coming back to the adaptive sports piece, I snowboard and I ski and I rock climb and I whitewater kayak and I compete in Brazilian jiu-jitsu against people without any disabilities. And all of these are things that, of course, I'm not the only blind person out there doing this stuff, but most aren't. And I think some of that is because they don't know that's there. But I think people, if they did realize all of these opportunities are out there and that even though it may not be common, you can create these opportunities for yourself and you will reap the benefits of having that sense of independence and getting out there and doing these things. And there's a fitness component to that too that also plays into the mental health part. But those are the really big ones. Like speaking up for me has that it's something I beat the dead horse on because it has saved my life. As you can imagine, things did not get easier after I shot myself. They got worse. And specifically, like I said, 8.5 months after I shot myself, I was snowboarding. A month after that, I was back in college. And 6 months after that, I was back out on my own. A couple months after that, I bought my first house, and it was at the end of 2020. It was in the middle of COVID. I was living in downtown Denver where I didn't know anyone. Everything was locked down. It's like the pace of everything finally slowed. And I was finally forced to register how different my life was and the full weight of how different my life would always be and how difficult it was and how little I could do at the time because I had chased my independence so hard. I mean, getting back to college in 9.5 months after losing your sight and having to relearn how to do everything else is quick. Another 6 months after that is also quick to be out on your own. But like that was the only goal that I had was getting back out on my own. And then it's like once I had it, I realized, okay, technically I can scrape by all of these things, but I'm not really I'm existing here. I'm not living. And I'm pursuing this clinical psychology degree that I don't really want. And so in early 2021, I reached a point where I was suicidal again. But the difference was I was sober and which that would change because I hadn't realized that I was an alcoholic leading up to my suicide attempt. But I was sober during this time, but I reached a point where I was so miserable that I felt suicidal again. And I didn't understand why, because again, I had reached this point. I had achieved these goals that I'd set for myself when I was in the hospital. And at that point, I was talking with my therapist once a week. It was just routine calls. We were still working through everything, but she called one day and I was terrified to speak up because I thought if I admitted to someone that I was suicidal, that I would be taken away to a loony bin and sedated and locked up until someone felt that I wasn't a threat to myself. But that wasn't the case. I still think this was the bravest thing that I've ever done. I told her, I don't know why I feel this way. I just know that I do. And I'm having these scary thoughts and I know where this leads because I've had this before and I didn't speak up. And that led to us talking from once a week to every day and sometimes multiple times a day. And it lasted several months, but I got through it because I showed up and did the work. I mean, it was work. It was painful and it was hard and it was slow and it was agonizing, but that showed me because that was the first time that I'd ever made it through something like that without shooting myself, that things can and would get better if I showed up to do the work. And so I try and drive that home to people. After all of that, after having shot myself and disabled myself and then hitting another low, I still got through that stuff because I spoke up. And it's, again, it's not a quick fix, which is unfortunate. You don't want people to be stuck in that unreasonable agony of depression that is really indescribable unless you've experienced it. That is true depression is very different from having a couple off days or even, I still go through ruts now. I call them ruts because they're periods where I'm bummed out and not necessarily super motivated, but it's very different than the times when I've been depressed. And what typically gets me through that stuff is forcing myself to still do the stuff that I don't want to do and maintaining very, very active life and again, talking about this stuff. But I think those couple things altogether really are key in addressing mental health. I mean, it sounds oversimplified and it is at face value like that, but you have to tell somebody if you're struggling. If you keep that in, it turns into something nastier altogether, and the force of it seems to multiply, and that's how, I mean, that kills people.
Definitely. You are so right. And I find that I completely agree with your assessment on the entirety of the situation that you've presented us, that you're right. Speaking up is really important. The problem is that it's really hard. And that's the problem that I have in my own life, speaking up at the right times and not speaking up at the right time. That's a problem. But I think you're very right, and I think there's all of that wisdom needs to be absorbed by the blindness community. That you're 100% on there. That we need to learn how to speak up, whether we're considering ending our life or not, or dealing with other issues. Speaking up is still a life skill, and it's still something that we all need to learn how to do, and we can all do it better, and we can all improve it. And that's really you've illuminated for me. Absolutely. And the fact, Zach, that you were saying that the numbers from Department of Veteran Affairs showing the rate of suicide of veterans, that is, I mean, I've heard those numbers before, but it still saddens me tremendously as a patriotic American. That's still deeply disturbing and deeply concerning, considering that people like you clearly love our country like I do. And we need to do, obviously, we need to do better. But you've obviously, in the same way, had some, I guess I'm trying to think how to ask this.
Just be blunt. You're not gonna,
Okay.
I'm not sensitive. Go for it.
Well, that's interesting actually, because let me just, okay, fine. I'll just be really blunt with you, because when I came up to you, I'm glad you said that to me, Zach, because when I came up to you on Facebook the first time, I know I rubbed you the wrong way, or I know I kind of freaked you out when I popped up. By the way, the reason why I was able to contact your page is I pushed a button. That's a business page button, and I pushed a button that triggered that question, by the way. To tell me more about yourself, or can you chat, or I don't know which button I pushed, but that's what triggered that. And I thought you had, it's just kind of an interesting side street to walk on for a minute. I thought you had pushed those buttons because people, when they set up their business pages, they set up those buttons, or sometimes they're set up, actually, my mistake. No, I'm wrong. I'm not perfect either. The buttons are actually set up automatically by Facebook, and a lot of people forget that when you have a business page, the software algorithm triggers those prompt buttons. Yeah, that's where I was getting that idea from.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, because
I'm sorry I scared you. I really didn't mean to scare you like that.
no, you didn't scare me. It was just like, I can't remember exactly what it said. It might have said like, tell me more about yourself. And like,
Something
that was
like
it.
that.
And I was like,
That was it.
well,
And then I gave the long answer.
Who's asking and why?
I would say,
yeah.
and I know this is none of my business, but since I brought it up, I guess it sort of is my business. I guess maybe you should go into your settings of your business page there, mate, and take those buttons down, because people push those buttons. No pun intended. People push your buttons with the idea that you actually set those up, and that you're actually going to realize, and respond to the question that they push.
Yeah, I didn't even
it's
know
weird.
they were there, because other people reach out on there. That's the first time I've ever had that. I didn't even know that was a thing. So that's good to know. Yeah.
That's the first. So I'm the first guy that ever pushed your buttons. Literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty big shoes to fill. That's a
Oh,
pretty big honor.
yeah,
Um,
what an accomplishment.
that's weird and endearing. Okay, cool, man. Well, you know what? Well, you can push Aaron's opinion buttons anytime. You can push my buttons every day of the week because I love getting my buttons pushed by someone like you, someone who's
Sweet.
so self-aware, and you're obviously a good person. You're a kind person. You've obviously been through the ringer, but overarchingly, you're also doing great. You brought up the snowboarding thing. I never snowboarded when I was growing up, but I did blind skiing. And when I was a boy, my father would ski in front of me and we would wear our vests, blind skier. And that was one of my fondest memories as a boy. I don't say where I am now, but I grew up in Maryland. So we would ski in Virginia and in the Blue Ridge and stuff like that. And that was always a great experience for me, skiing. So I completely support that. I think skiing, snowboarding, just getting out there doing something physical is a huge help. And if it doesn't always help your mental health, it'll certainly help your physical health, maintaining your physical conditioning and your active level and things like that.
Yeah, and
So yeah.
those, yeah, I mean, those, obviously, those are the big things like that are big outings. But I mean, I lift weights 6 days a week and go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 5 days a week. Like it's keeping yourself, it's not like you're going to be able to go skiing every week, especially none of us can drive. So,
Sure.
but I think people miss the boat on that a little bit and overlook that and how big of an impact that can have. But,
Absolutely.
and
Well, I mean, and skiing is A, it's expensive. B, it's exhausting. C, you have to live relatively near one of the resorts or else it's just sort of too tiring and too much work to get out there and get back. That's the problem. Yeah. I have friends who live out, what is it? Beaver Creek, Vale, one of those places out there.
yep.
One of those. I forget which one they live near, but they live near one of those places. They moved out there on purpose because the wife actually loved skiing so much. She wanted to live like 2 minutes away from the place. They bought a place on purpose. Unless you do that, it would be hard to ski a lot. And that's why it's kind of a hard hobby, especially when you grow up. But it's an incredible experience for a child, certainly for you too. So it's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said something, this is another thing that I try and bring attention to. You
Sure.
mentioned me obviously being in a good place now. Like I think something else that's important to highlight, and I try to when I speak, and whether that's through interviews or speaking engagements, but people, and I think it's, everybody loves a good positive story and a positive outcome, but I think it's important to share, like that was 6 years ago, and there was 2.5 years of rampant alcoholism in the middle of that, where things were very, very ugly. And I just say that I think it's important to touch on because of the fact that, yes, if you just see the beginning and where we are now, that looks like, oh
Absolutely.
my God, things wound up so positive, but like that's not the reality of really any of people dealing with big things like that. Like it typically, or not typically, sometimes it is not this pre glow up story, and it's natural to struggle. I don't think it's natural to wind up where I did, where
No.
I was binging. I was going on blackout binges for 2 or 3 days straight,
Ooh la la,
then
man.
recovering for 2 or 3 days in between, and then going
Oh,
back out and doing it again. It was really, really bad. So
holy shit. I mean,
yeah.
holy shit. Again, I know you say I can be as blunt as I want, right?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so what caused that? Where did you come from, as a teenager before? Because obviously, I mean, well, Marines don't drink too much, but certainly you don't drink in boot camp. I know that, obviously. So,
Marines do drink a shitload. That was Marines absolutely drink a lot.
okay, so
Yeah.
I didn't specifically know that. Now, I also have a very respectful and positive view of the military itself. I have a positive, what's the word? A positive feeling about the military in my heart as a patriot. So I didn't specifically know that. I have noticed though that Marines do have a personality, which you certainly have. Marines are characters. You Marine people are a bunch of characters for sure in comparison to the other branches. I have noticed that part. So, okay. So let me ask a silly question. So since you, Zach, said it, since Marines, as you say, typically seem to have an issue with alcohol.
That's not what I meant.
Oh,
That's not
whoa,
exactly
whoa,
what I said.
whoa,
I'm
whoa. No,
saying,
oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Okay, well, maybe I
no,
didn't
I'm just
understand it.
culturally in the military,
Uh-huh.
drinking is a big thing. I mean,
Oh,
it is,
okay.
and not talking about your problems and drinking instead is also a very big thing. It's just,
Okay. Okay.
but
Okay.
it's, we would be gone for weeks at a time in the field, and that's just when we're stateside, not when we're deployed, but
Right.
stateside, you
Mm-hmm.
go out to the field for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. You come back and get a week off before you go out for another 2 or 3 weeks. And like, that's that Friday or Saturday night when you get
Mm-hmm.
back, everybody's boozing and doing dumb shit. And it's just everybody blows off steam and it's a morale thing. But
Yeah.
there is definitely culture, I would say, probably collegey type of
Mm-hmm.
culture in that way. Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think anything, what I was trying to express, and I didn't understand you at first, and now I do. And then I asked the question the wrong way, and now I'm going to ask it the right way. So, do you think something could anything be done to help Marines cope?
So
Why, like something needs to be done here. This is not
no, it's
okay.
not.
Well,
No, I'm not saying that like the military, why as a whole abuses alcohol. I'm just saying that
no, I
it's a
know.
culture. And so it's not, it's the reason alcohol became a problem for me wasn't the military. That was through my
Okay.
own doing. It was because instead of speaking up, I chose, I discovered, because initially early on, if we go back to, so I came back. It's actually while I was still deployed. I'd found out that my wife was cheating on me. I came back and tried to make things work, and it didn't. And I separated from her in January of 2018. That from there through March, I wasn't happy, as you can imagine, but I was dealing with things. I was just keeping myself very, very busy. That's when fitness was always a big thing for me, and I'd always played sports year round, but I really became a gym rat at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
then basically any spare time that I could get, I was at the gym, I was training for a half marathon, and on the weekends, I was taking my motorcycle to the racetrack. In March, I was in that motorcycle accident, and that's when I really started to struggle with depression. And I mean, I've had head injuries before. Outside of shooting myself, I've never had one like that. It was bad, and it changed things for me. And I became very agitated and impulsive, and I couldn't sleep. And like I said, I experienced depression for the first time, like true. I had never experienced that before, but
Mm-hmm.
when I couldn't sleep, and I found that a drink or two before bed, I could sleep, and I could at least fall asleep. I wasn't really able to stay asleep, and one or two drinks turned into three or four, and but with that, and essentially the reason I was able to fall asleep was because I was turning off my mind. And as I continued to do that, it became, okay, well, I can shut off these feelings with the alcohol, and I'm not having to talk about them because I can just drink it away. And that's what really progressed. And with that kind of comes, I mean, that's ultimately what led up to the suicide attempt, or that drinking problem lasted through the suicide attempt. But I still hadn't realized after I shot myself, like, hey, the level of drinking that I was doing, I had absolutely reached the point of being an alcoholic. I didn't realize that until the middle slash late 2021. And so I'd made it through that big depressive episode that I talked about a few minutes ago. And then it's the point where my college coursework, because I started pursuing a clinical psychology degree after I shot myself, where I reached my first statistics class in the school. It was over the summer semester, so the school was short staffed and they weren't making my stuff accessible. And I just, like, for whatever reason, it'd been huge barriers. The school had assigned someone to be my eyeballs instead of converting my materials, and it pissed me off because I was totally independent at that point. But if you set my math homework in front of me, I had to have a sighted student meet me over a Zoom call to help me with my homework, and that bothered me. So I just flippantly, after we took our first exam of that course together, I was like, oh, I'm going to blow off some steam and order some alcohol. And that unlocked whatever that alcoholic was in me that I had before, that had just been interrupted by me shooting myself, because that is what kicked off the 2.5 years. And it was like I had picked up right where I left off, and me drinking would pretty much I would most of the time turn into me blacking out. But what happens along that timeline is getting back to, and I promise I'm answering your question in a long way, but I think it requires this explanation. The drinking problem there, as just like I was with reaching to the bottle so I could sleep and so I could shut off emotions. That's what it became after I was blind. And when I started drinking again in 2021, as it was, okay, when things are like early on, it was accessibility things. For whatever reason, digital accessibility has been a huge hot button topic for me. And I think surrounding because of the same points that I just made with like, okay, I've done everything I can to make myself fully independent, but if some software developer is lazy and doesn't make this website accessible, then like I'm stuck relying on people again. But so early on, I would hit frustrations with that stuff. And that's also the same time that I decided that I was going to drop out of college and teach myself how to code, which, shocker, the tools that you have to write code in also have a lot of accessibility issues, and even just trying to find resources that are accessible to learn how to code it's tough. And so I would reach these frustrations and decide I'm going to blow off some steam again. But slowly, or I guess it wasn't slowly, it was pretty quickly. What I was doing was whittling away like my stress tolerance for this stuff, because anytime I was reaching what felt like an unreasonable level of stress, I was drinking. And so I like deconditioned myself to be able to deal with stress. And so it became smaller things. And then it wasn't just accessibility. It was a bad interaction at the doctor's office, or whatever, a bad interaction somewhere with an Uber driver or whatever. And then sometimes it started to be like positive things that I would be like, oh, I got promoted at jujitsu. And I would just, the bar for me to drink became less and less because I was drinking with that stress tolerant. And that's what ultimately, like, if you look at substance use disorders, most people are trying to escape from something, or sometimes it's said that, people with brain injuries are essentially filling in for the imbalances of neurotransmitters in their heads. Like that's what they're chasing with that, is that they get the hit of dopamine from the alcohol or whatever, and it's filling in for shortages that they have in their brain from whatever injuries it was. And that's how that developed over time. It wasn't because of the culture in the Marines, and that's not like a rampant problem in the Marines or the military as a whole.
No, I understand you. Thank you. And I'm very sorry for that misunderstanding, by the way.
No, you're fine. I didn't want like that to be what people take away as like the military is a booze house where everyone's got problems. Yeah.
That's certainly not what I was trying to express either. Right.
Okay.
What I was truly trying to express is that it's in your past now. I mean, you're behind it now. So that's good. But it's been your behind, or it's behind you, as we said. The past is your past now. But
yep.
What I meant was there should be programs internally within the branches to help people who might have that type of, situation. That's what I meant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, I've been out since 2018, so my knowledge is a little dated here, but the culture is you don't speak up about stuff, especially in the infantry. I mean, the infantry is going to be it's a different beast in its own. It's definitely more hardcore than the rest of the military, whether that's, Army infantry or whatever. It's a different environment, and it needs to be that way to an extent, right? Like, absolutely, you can't have pussies in the infantry, but yes, if you're having real problems, you need to be able to speak up. And I don't know, I hope that it's starting to shift. I mean, that's why I try and talk about this stuff. I mean, those doors need to be open, again, within reason. You can't have people abusing that system just to get out of things, but it's pretty obvious if someone's actually dealing with stuff, right? And that, you need to not have their careers be impacted by seeking help for that stuff. Because that is what a lot of people worry about.
Right. No, absolutely. And then you mentioned the importance of therapy too, right? And I think that's a very, very important thing that many people around the blindness community struggle with, either realizing that they need to talk to a therapist, or that they need to get a new therapist, or that therapy is a huge issue around the blindness community. So how does therapy really work?
Yeah. And I guess I'm actually, as you said that, that made me wonder, like, I don't know that many blind people. Most of the other blind people that I know are vets that I know through these, like the whitewater kayaking trips or the ski stuff that I go do. But I, so I don't know if this is talked about a lot, but I would imagine, given the complications and challenges of being blind, that it is more prevalent in our community than the general population. But do you notice that that's talked about a lot?
Yes.
Okay.
And that it needs to be. And that, as oftentimes is said, um, in the past, I mean, I've been to a therapist before. Most people have been to a therapist before. Okay. At least once. As we say, this is one of the issues, right? There's this constant stigma about therapy. There should never be a stigma about asking for help when you need it. And that's just my philosophy. Most people, a lot of people might not agree with that all the time, might not agree with me all the time about that. But if you need help, ask. There's nothing wrong with asking for help when you know you need it. And that's kind of my theory about why successful people need therapists, why everybody needs to talk, right? And that's why there's this art form called podcasting, because we need to talk about stuff. You know, that's just
And
my
people
theory.
learn
Yeah.
through these conversations for sure. Like these are valuable points to touch on.
Therapeutic in some sense. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and people hearing this might, that again might open that door for them to be like, okay, these guys are talking about it. They do it.
It's
I
okay
can do it
to
too.
it's okay to talk about it. And something that I've told some of my friends around the blindness community, and something that I've told uh, mentioned just elsewhere, just in my life in general, is that it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to not be okay too. That's a
I
very
say
subtle.
those exact words. Yes.
But it's very subtle. It's okay to have a bad day, because you couldn't possibly have a good day if you never had a bad, you know, or if somebody, or the other one that's a little bit funny or a little bit more lighthearted is if when somebody tells you, Zach, they say, "Oh, I've never been fired. I was just born one of those people that was just born wealthy, born perfect. I've never been fired. No, nope, never failed an exam." There's only one word that I call those people, and that's liar. Everybody has a bad day. They just don't tell you. That's the trick with that.
Well,
You
and
know,
what you said that it's okay to not be okay. I take that a little further and I say it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not do anything about it. Kind of bringing that
precise
back to, yeah,
bingo.
like
Yes, you're precisely correct. Yes,
yeah,
it's okay to be okay. It's okay to not be okay, but it's never okay to do nothing. Similar. Yes. Yes. Doing nothing
yeah,
is never the right choice. Yes.
yeah.
Completely right.
Because I mean, that's you, as much as it sucks, you can pull yourself out of that. And it's again, like you said, therapy might be the option for that. And I know you asked how that works for,
So
I,
what I meant, right. So what I meant was, what have you found as a blind person now? Because like it or not, you're in our blind group now. Like it or not, you're blind.
I am
You
pretty
know,
fucking blind. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to let you get away with saying you're sighted. Sorry, man, you're blind. I think, but so have you gone to therapy like in person, online? I mean, talk about it. Talk about, obviously you can't specify the character of the people, but you can maybe specify some general things that you've noticed. Do you go online? Do you go in
Yeah.
person? Things like that. How does it really work for blind people? Yeah.
Yeah. So I went in person early on because I was in the hospital where the therapist worked. But and then when I was still living with my parents early on for that first little bit before I got back out on my own, I would go in person. But it's ever since then, it's been just over a phone call. But I really lucked out, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. So I just got lucky, and I actually didn't like my therapist at first, but we wound up, I've had the same one since I was transferred to the VA once I was stable. And so it's been 5.5 years that I've had her now. But a lot of people, it takes time to find a fit with your therapist, and therapists know this and aren't offended by this if you say like, hey, this isn't a good fit. I'd like to try someone else. That's normal to have to shop around for a therapist. These are complicated things, especially when you're talking about sensitive topics like this, and you just might not jive with people. That's the reality of humans interacting together. But so I do it all over the phone because I can't drive. I'm sure if I could drive, she would probably have me come in. But it's these days, it's really just a lot of maintenance stuff. But I had a lot to process with the suicide attempt and having to process everything with my ex-wife because I had never spoken about any of that leading up to my suicide attempt. I had to deal with coping with my blindness, and then also, trying to get sober for, like I said, I couldn't string together more than a couple days at a time. And while I was trying to get sober, I got diagnosed with a just horrific genetic disease that is incurable, currently incurable, called Huntington's disease that causes your brain tissue to die and develops as, yeah, so it develops as first as speech and movement disorder, and then slowly things start to degrade and it becomes behavioral and mental health issues. And basically you get to the point where you're a shell of yourself and kind of in a vegetative state, almost just non-responsive, non-verbal in a bed. And that was that's part of the reason that my alcoholism lasted for so long, is as I was finally realizing that I needed help and went to rehab. I actually got diagnosed with that disease while I was at rehab. And so it just, when I came back from rehab, that was my new excuse to drink, was like, well, fuck this. Like this game is rigged, and I was throwing myself a pity party. But my point with all of that is,
Sure.
I've dealt with some shit, and it's all been through talking about it. And really, like, though it is maintenance stuff today, and I would say when it comes to actually addressing and working through things, the big thing that I've noticed is that just like anytime you're having a conversation with someone, like right now, whether we realize it or not, you and I are at least subconsciously like considering how each other are going to receive what we are saying to each other. In speaking with a therapist, when you're speaking, or really anyone, you'd be talking to a friend, someone that you trust about these things that are bothering you or really trying to expose this stuff. I've noticed, for me at least, because I am very, very hard on myself, and sometimes I think that's really good and where a lot of my drive comes from, but it can also lead me to to frame things in a not so like generous light for myself. And in voicing that stuff externally, for that mechanism of conversation, for whatever reason, helps me be more objective and view things from a different perspective and be more reasonable on things, I believe. And I think that for a fact, I know has helped me a lot. And but the coping skills that have come with that, like, and it really, again, the big like breakthrough in terms of therapy and realizing the value of it was during those several months in early 2021 when I was struggling, because I told my therapist that like I said, I don't know why I feel this way. I just know that I don't want to be here, and I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to act on it. I'm just telling you how I feel, and I'm worried about it. And so she basically assigned me homework each day. And looking back now, I realize it's kind of meditative in a sense, but she had me every day. She wanted me to sit down in a quiet place without any, no music, no nothing, just quiet place, and sit and do nothing except try and be aware of these these feelings that I was feeling. At that point, I was depressed to the point where I was suicidal, and not understanding it, try and pay attention to, okay, when I'm sitting there and feeling miserable, like what just came through my mind, and not just noticing it, not judging it, not trying to push it away, not saying, oh, I shouldn't feel that way, but recognizing it and making a note of it. And I would take that to our therapy sessions with, like, what, this is what came up when I was doing my homework today. And then she would help me kind of tease out what it was. And now it's to the point where that's still, when I'm in ruts, like, I have a giant love sack beanbag, and that is still my little meditation chair where I will go make myself sit with whatever these shitty feelings are, and try and parse out what it is. And then I've learned how to process them, but it's the combination of the combination of the conversation, like I said, and they will, there's all sorts of different modalities that these psychologists are trained in, and some specialize in certain ones. And I've tried different ones, like cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like that. But again, you have to explore your options and figure out what works for you, because just like anything else with people, we are all different.
Yeah, you're so right. You are so, so right. And that's why people have to find, if they need therapy, if they feel they need it, they have to reach out to the right person. The problem seems to be that it's very difficult to find therapists around the blindness community that are really interested enough and are really on the ball enough, to really understand what needs to be done. So,
But that's, I guess, and I think I might have just understood, or might have just misunderstood what you said. Do you mean like the blindness community has a hard time finding therapists, or it's a hard time finding therapists in the blindness space, as in, like, that specialize in people with blindness?
but A and B are correct. Both and all of the above.
But
All of those things are accurate.
I'm genuinely curious here. Like, why does it have to be a therapist that specializes in blindness?
Well, I think that, and I don't know this to be true. After all, it says right here on the label, it's an opinion show. So my opinion is
That's very fair. Yeah.
yeah. Remember, guys, nothing that we're saying tonight is factual. These are opinions and the experiences that Zach and I have had in our different lives. So these are opinions, not facts. My opinion is, I do think blind people have had a significantly, whether you are born blind like myself or whether you become blind later, blindness is a challenge. Blindness is an obstacle. Blindness is an experience all unto itself. And I do think, and my opinion of it is that if you're going to have a conversation with someone who's blind, right, in a therapeutic sense, in a clinical sense, my opinion is that yes, the therapist would need to be aware of the blindness, because blindness certainly is one of our five senses, right? It certainly impacts the way we think and the way we act and the way we move throughout society. So that's only an opinion that I have. I think that there is a difference between a sighted person getting therapy and a blind person getting therapy, right? But
I don't. And I'm not arguing.
But I also think that all people need therapy. So it kind of goes both ways. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess my initial, like, hesitation with that is, like, I don't,
Sure.
yeah, my therapist she's not blind, and I don't know that she'd ever dealt with someone who was blind before, but we've still been able to have meaningful outcomes here. And I guess, yeah, I think just for people at home to realize, like, yeah, that's, again, a thing here where we're different. And, like, maybe for you, that's something that you need. And for some people, that might be something that they don't need, or, yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
And sure. And the other difference, the other thing to learn about too, is that since I've been blind my whole life, I've also experienced discrimination and other types of problems throughout my childhood and teen years and other traumas, totally different from yours, certainly, but still traumas of my own that I've had to grapple with growing up. so that's probably why I think that. But yeah, it's very, it's a major thing. Yeah. But then you got this interest in coding and software and solving these IT problems. So talk about that for a bit. That's pretty cool stuff. And I know a lot of blind people who are very good at IT and coding. So this is definitely doable for you. Talk about it.
Yeah, so it's not IT. I'm writing the code for things, and this is a thing I talk about a lot too. Like I know people, blind people have a hard time finding employment sometimes. It's an excellent field to go down where all of the code I'm writing is textual, meaning that my screen reader can access it. Some of the features of the tools that I have to write code in are inaccessible, but you can find workarounds for that stuff. But to take that to a further extent, my niche really became everything that I make does look and function normally for people without disabilities, but they're also accessible for virtually every physical disability. And that's kind of been my bread and butter has been this accessibility space. And who better to become a subject matter expert in that stuff than the people who need it most? So if you hear any of this stuff that I talk about and you're interested in it, start digging. I taught myself from Googling. I Googled and read articles online and was very stubborn and very doable. But what I initially I made a word puzzle game called Xanagrams. And like I said, it was accessible to basically everybody, to virtually everyone. And it was just a word puzzle game, but that was kind of my first dip into this space. And that came out on the 4th of July in 2023, and it won the Apple Viz Game of the Year
Holy moly.
and Mobile Accessible Games Game of the Year awards that year. So did really well. And I just recently took it off the App Store actually because I don't have time to keep up with it between the book, the podcast, and the current software project that I'm working on. But it did very well. It received a lot of positive feedback, obviously with the awards, and it actually opened up some speaking opportunities for me in the tech space, which was kind of wild. So I presented at the Game Accessibility Conference back in November up in Washington in front of a bunch of AAA game studios about my work and accessibility, and especially in the context of accessibility coming and the barriers that surround being a blind game developer. So it was really neat. But today I'm working on something that I'm not ready to get too into the details on, but it's going to solve a lot of the issues that I had in college and hopefully change education for people with disabilities. It will still be accessible to people without disabilities, just like my first project, and these technologies will still be fruitful for sighted people or non-disabled people to use, but the secret sauce underneath is the accessibility piece again. Xanagrams was accessible to everyone from color blindness to total blindness and total deafness to I'm paralyzed from the neck down to I don't have arms and I have to use my phone with my voice. Output to refreshable braille displays, and so will all of this stuff, and it'll be stuff that you can use for educational purposes, like studying and hopefully bigger plans moving forward into the future. But that's about as much as I can talk about it right now because I'm not ready to release it.
Understood. Understood.
Yeah.
I think that's really incredible, and I certainly appreciate it. And one of the biggest barriers that blind people have is getting an education. Getting a university education is a big issue for blind people, right? So that's a huge thing. And if you can develop a software, a methodology, an IT product, whatever it is that would help make education accessible to blind people or people with disabilities in general, man, oh man, Zach, that's definitely the right thing to do. Go for it. That would be such a help to society. That would be such a appropriate way to give back to our community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've been working on it since last March. So I've got quite a bit of momentum behind me right now and excited to see where it goes. At the very least, it helps somebody, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. So Apple Viz, I believe that's also a podcast. So were you a guest on the Apple Viz podcast?
I have been a guest on there, yeah.
Oh, good,
I
good.
guess that probably would have been maybe December 2023 or early 2024 because I won
Mm,
that award was Game of the Year 2023. So yeah, somewhere around there probably. But
okay.
yeah,
Oh, good, 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 good. Sounds really, really, really fascinating. Yeah, yeah. Have you connected over the years, that you've had this interest in coding and things? Have you connected though with other blind? I mean, I'm sure you're in a lot of the WhatsApp groups for AI accessible and things like that. I'm sure you're in a lot of those groups, right? On WhatsApp or
I'm
Facebook,
not.
right?
No, no.
Really?
I'm
There's
in.
tons of stuff. There are. So do you have? Well, I was going to ask you off air, but I'll ask you now. So do you have WhatsApp? Now that we know
I,
each other, do you
I
have WhatsApp?
do. I just don't use it. I'm very busy, and I usually just
Right.
find the stuff that I need from Googling. I really like if I'm on social media, it's to post about something that I've done or I'm doing, and that's kind of about it. I try not to spend too much time on there because it's
I
my daily routine is
understood.
wake up, write for a couple hours, go to the gym, go to jujitsu, come back, code for the rest of the day, and edit any podcast episodes that I have to edit, and it's been keeping me busy.
Yeah, I can understand. I can understand. Do you are you still an early riser? You still get up at 4, 5, 6 in the morning?
Yeah, and it's not like I've been up since a little before 2:30 this morning, and some of that is like I can't help that.
Mm-hmm.
I go through weird ups and downs with sleep. I go through bouts of the non-24 stuff, but
Yeah.
it's so I mean I get a lot done on those days, but
Well,
it
go for it.
winds.
Well, my theory is okay, fine. If you can't sleep, I would tell you to try to over time overcome that one. But that's very understandable. Blind people are very compassionate about that. That non-24 thing, that yeah, that's a whole nother beast. That's a whole nother bear to wrestle down, I guess. That's a real handful for people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I've
have
just
usable
learned to.
vision, so yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
less. So in my case, I am blind and obviously I have glaucoma, but I have usable vision. And so I can't see well enough to drive a car or have a driver's license or read a print book, but I can see well enough to do some things. But I'm able to see the sunlight, and that's what you're missing out on is if you don't have usable vision now, you don't have the sunlight going into your eyes, kind of showing your brain that it's time to be active, and that really affects people. This is a
Yeah,
big,
because
it's a
yours.
huge problem.
Yeah, your circadian rhythm is regulated through your retinas, and my optic nerves aren't working, so there's no signal going. And yeah, it's kind of been a learning process with it though. Like I've definitely it's very frustrating to me when I do because it'll be a couple months where I'm really struggling to sleep, and then a couple months where I sleep good, and
Hmm.
I've just had to learn to not fight it. Like you
Yeah.
just kind of have to roll with the punches with it,
I
and
guess that's how it'll go too, and I've never thought of it that way. I guess it comes in cycles, I guess, sort of like Zarkadi, sort of like your version of a Zarkadian rhythm, I suppose. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, I hope that over time, medicine and technology will help us to overcome that as blind people who suffer very profoundly from it. But of course, this is overly obvious to you, Zach. But I would say stay on a schedule. Get up with an alarm at a certain, just stay perfectly on schedule every single day. I'm not saying that's going to cure it. It's not. It
it's
is
the
not
wake
going
up
to,
time that gets me. I can typically,
yeah.
I can fall asleep around 9 o'clock, but if I don't take my sleeping meds tonight, I'll be up
Ooh,
before
boy.
midnight.
Ooh, boy.
It's how it goes. It's so weird. It is so strange.
Well, it's not strange, and it's not weird. It's not strange. It's you. We have several family members in our household and in our close family who also suffer ridiculously from insomnia, all sorts of sleep issues. I am blessed, I suppose, from God and I don't take this lightly. I'm blessed that I don't have that problem because sleep issues. A lot of people have issues with sleep. It's a huge problem, truly, it truly is. And there's not much that can be done, from what I've heard. I mean, apart from trying to stay on schedule, trying to take the meds, staying well hydrated, all the stuff you do, I'm sure. But it's very tricky. Yeah. Yeah, I know so many people who are sighted who can't sleep worth a wink. I don't get that. Like, I mean, Zach, I guess you would say, Aaron, you're just lucky. Shut your mouth. But I just lie into bed, and when I want to go to bed, I just, click off for the night. Just go to bed.
Yeah, it's my thing is it's seriously it's like even
I
if I
believe,
wake
no, I'm
up,
believing you. It's not a joke.
I just
believe you.
can't turn my mind off. It's weird. It's like once even if I wake up and I have to pee, it's like my mind is on, and whether I'm exhausted or not, it's not going back off. It is so
Well,
it's interesting.
so it's very interesting. And I never have to get up and use the bathroom at night. I never have to do that. But that is interesting. I mean, I would say I'm not a doctor, and I'm definitely not a psychologist, and I'm not a therapist, but I would say if I was having that issue, I would be. If it was me, I would be, and I'm sure you already have, talking to a medical person about that, saying, look, I've got this problem. It's kind of frustrating. It won't go away. Is there anything that could be done? Probably nothing substantial could be done about it, really. But again, you've learned to cope in life. You have to learn to speak up, and you have to learn to cope. So fine. If you're going to have that issue in your life, then so be it. So how can you overcome it and manage that is what that's going to be. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. No, I've heard of this problem. This is a recurring issue with blind people, and it affects employment. It affects social life. It affects everything. So,
Yep.
yep, definitely. And then, so then you do all this, you're working on this project, and then, so then I got to tell you, I think you're a really fascinating person in the fact that not only have you been through this this journey that you've been through, but you've also taken it upon yourself to get into the podcast space. Now, podcasting can be pretty stressful. It's not always easy. In fact, it's really not. So what possessed you? And I'm glad you're in the podcast space now. What possessed you to get into the podcast space?
I've wanted to do it for a couple of years and just, I didn't feel like it was the time. It just, part of that was probably because I was, still struggling. I mean, so what, December was a year sober. So I'm, 14 months in now, 15 months in. But before that, like, I learned some of this stuff, but I wasn't putting it into action. I was trying. I could not figure out how to get sober. And so like, I could talk the talk, but I couldn't walk the walk. And that's the same reason that I didn't start writing my book until last year. And, it's, you, all that talk is useless if you can't actually lead by example with that stuff. And the podcast isn't a mental health podcast, but because of my own story, it has tended to come up quite a bit. I just recorded episode 17 today, and I think
Congratulations.
thank you. I think about a third of the episode so far it's come up where people have either dealt with severe depression and suicidal ideation or some sort of substance abuse. And it's some of it was, I finished the first draft of my book on Thanksgiving, and I was like, you know what, I mistakenly thought, oh, I'll have more time now because I'll be editing the book and not writing it outright. And so now I'll do the podcast. And I started it in December, and it's been, I haven't had more time with editing the book. It is just as time consuming to go back through the book and edit it as it is to write it, but it's been good. I'm really good. I got it started, and it's, it all came through. I've met a lot of interesting people over the past couple of years, especially as I've started to share my story, and it's not just necessarily people with, like I said, other people with stories of overcoming and things like that. But, just people doing big things and interesting, unique people out there that whose stories I want to help get out there and that I think there are a lot of lessons in, whether they be very positive or someone learning through mistakes or just helping someone spread the word about what they're doing. And it's been a new source of passion for me. So I've been really enjoying it so far.
I support it. So good. So do you mostly do interviews, long form interview content like what we're doing now? Do you do some solo ones where you just talk about what's going on? How do you structure your podcast? And what is it called, by the way?
It's called Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell, and it's available everywhere. But so far it's been all long form interviews slash conversations, and that's my plan for now is keep it that way. I might do solo shows down the road, but I don't see a purpose for it right now. But I've had anyone on from, the co-founder and executive director of nonprofits to combat wounded service members. I've got a former Navy SEAL coming on, a former Super Bowl winner coming on. I just had a dude on today who was on Shark Tank and has a business that he started in his garage, and he's now done a couple of million in sales. Like it's had an interesting span of people on so far, and yeah, I'm content doing that. The episodes have averaged about an hour in length. I would say the shortest ones have been about 45 minutes, and the longer one or two have been closer to an hour and a half. But I research them beforehand, but I don't send questions. So it's naturally flowing conversations. And I just kind of pick at their stories and we go where it goes.
Similar to what we do here, just kind of talk and just see where it all ends up. By the way, I wanted to go back to something and we kind of drifted around and I forgot to bring back to it, but it really fascinated me. So back to treatment, you were when going like rewinding the tapes, right? So you
Yep.
said that you were diagnosed with this
Huntington's. Yep.
Huntington's disease. So how on earth did they come to that diagnosis when you were in treatment for something else? How were they able to precisely, like, I believe it, but how were they able to actually diagnose that? How did that work?
So
That's really weird.
it's genetic. My grandfather had it and died from it. And it's a 50-50 shot if it gets passed down from parent to child. My mom had never shown any symptoms, so we just didn't think that she had it. She never got tested before she had kids. The gene wasn't even discovered until 1993. I was born in 95, so it wasn't an option before I was born. And then she didn't want to get tested as an adult. And because she had never shown signs or gotten tested, I just didn't think that I had it because I didn't think she had it. And if she didn't have it, then I couldn't have it. It has to be passed down directly to child or from parent to child, and it's 50-50 shot. I found out she finally got tested a couple months before I went to rehab. We found out that she had it. And so as soon as we found out, I scheduled my appointment for the next day, but it takes a month or so for the results to come back. And I got my results while I was at rehab is how that happened.
Right. So, okay. Is it that your mother certainly had Huntington's and just never said anything?
So
Or
she just didn't
like,
know because it lies. So they call it in the pre-manifest state until there are forms of juvenile Huntington's, which they set in early and then, kids end up dying. If you have it as a child, you die as a child because it comes on even more severely and more rapidly in children when it does have early onset. But typically, if it's not an exact science of predicting, but like my aunt that had it and died, she died in her 50s and started showing signs in her late 40s. My mom is in her late 40s and is showing some early signs. I'm not showing any signs yet. So before you start to show signs, you don't know unless, we knew that we had a family history. And so once there, the only way they were able to know that she had it was through this genetic testing. So that's how no one knew.
oh, that's very interesting. It's, yeah, yeah. I was born with Peter's anomaly, by the way. So it affected both my eyes with the glaucoma and then my heart. And I also have a congenital heart defect. So
Okay.
I'm familiar with these congenital defects and congenital things that, crop up in family history, and then you never know that it's there until it appears again. It's deeply compelling and deeply fascinating. What's the purpose? If it hurts us, why do we need it in our genetic mix?
Honestly, it's kind of crazy. I mean, if you think about it, how uncommon it is to be born with like a disability
Yeah,
comparatively to how many people are born perfectly with as complex as everything is that's going
it's
on in the
beautiful. It
body.
just
It is.
it just goes to show that life is beautiful is what the answer is. There was a British YouTuber, I'm not going to name drop, but he's very famous. He has that very fun British voice, and he put out a video years ago about that. If we were never born the way we are right now, me and you, Zach, if we were never born at all, if I was never born in 1991, if you were never born in 95, the statistics are that neither one of us would have ever been born. Like this is the experience, is the life lesson. So just live it. That's the experience. You know, just go for it because you wouldn't have been born any other way, apparently. You know,
It's a wild thing.
it's truly bizarre and truly fascinating. Yeah, yeah. I'm. I guess they didn't. I guess they didn't test for it when you were, when you were just getting into the military, when you were going through all the medical testing. It's just, I
It's
mean,
not a very common thing. And again,
yeah, of
it
course.
didn't,
No, I get it. It's just mind-boggling how it just boggles my mind a little bit how, you went through all of that. I understand how you didn't know, but it's still really interesting that it's just interesting how it just kind of snuck up when it did. I would have thought they didn't test for it. I get it. No, I'm understanding you, but still, when you were going through all the medical tests to get into the Marines initially, it's like, I know nothing came up, but it's just weird that nothing was off. Like anyway, it's just that's fascinating. That's really mind-boggling. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a wild thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, 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 really wild. Yeah. So, and then your book. So when's your book coming out, and what's that called?
I don't know when it'll come out because
Okay,
the
that's fine.
publishing process is so convoluted. I will be finished with the second draft here in a couple days. I've got, I think, two chapters left to edit, and I've been getting a chapter done a day or so. So,
Mm-hmm.
but from there, I'll be sending it out to alpha readers to get feedback and then revise again before I start querying agents. And that really, in that process is where we find out like, okay, how long does this take? Because you query agents. If someone thinks it's interesting, the agent will make a deal with you to try and get you a publishing deal. Then they'll pitch your book to publishing houses. If they give you a deal that you like, then you get a publishing deal, and then it's totally up to them on when it gets published and how the editing process goes and all that. But if I can't find an agent, or even if I just decide to go the self-publishing route, that is always an option. But hoping it'll be out before the end of the year.
And is it going to be on audible.com? Because for us blind people, we love to listen to it. So are you going to get it on Audible?
I don't know, because if I self-publish, the cost of having an audiobook made, that's that's hard to justify. We'll see. I would love to, obviously, because it is, again, blind people listen to audiobooks, but we'll
Yeah,
have to see how
because
it goes.
how am I going to listen to it if it's not on audio?
Yeah, well, maybe it'll end up on Bard or something like that, but
Right. I
I
love
got to get it
Audible
out there
though.
first.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say you should definitely look into it and things like that because, I certainly have. We at Aaron's Opinion, we have a global audience who would love to read your story from all over the world. If it was in audio format, it would definitely be downloadable and accessible to them. And you could, if it was on Audible, you would make a little bit of a profit, and then I don't know, spend the profit on something that's important to you. And um, it's a good way to give back to society, I think. What are some things you cover in your book, just to give a general scope of it?
Yeah, it dives into these heavier topics in graver detail, and there's some background information on me, but we skimmed over things and left some things out. And specifically, like it covers the journey, but also I'm in a very unique position to be able to speak from someone who has survived this, and I've formed very well thought out opinions on mental health, on suicide prevention, and where I think society's kind of missing the boat with a lot of the stuff, specifically like around the warning signs that we're talked about or we were told about, and just an education around it, and also to be able to tell this stuff through the lens of an addict and not in the pursuit of any pity or in trying to justify my behavior, but giving people a lens into what it's like to be in that world, both on the in the context of depression and with the substance abuse. You know, I did some things I'm not proud of, and I hurt people, and I acted really just there's no way to justify how people act like I did when you're in the throes of an addiction. And I think it's important to explore that subject through the lens of someone who's been on the inside of it so that other people can see what that's like and realize what's going on there for the sake of just gaining some awareness. But also, you know, I talk about if you're the person watching a loved one go through that, like it's okay to set your boundaries or walk away, even if you can't, if that's starting to affect your life. And it's trying to get a conversation started around all of these taboo subjects that our society typically avoids, but need to be talked about because it can save lives and it can save a lot of people from a lot of harm.
Yeah, and it can educate people too. It can give people knowledge that they wouldn't already have. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Have you thought about like narrating your own book? Like after it's published, like narrating it in audio and then having your voice tell your own story?
Yeah, I don't know how realistic that is. I mean, you run a podcast, you've seen how hard it is to edit audio. And I think
Oh
for a
yeah.
book, especially, I mean, the first draft I think was 73,000 words. Me trying to read that, I'm not sure what that process would look like. I would like to have it professionally done if I'm going to do it so that it is as good of an audiobook as it can be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 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 So, moving forward, what do what are some of your new hobbies that you want to try now that we've just started 2025? What are some new hobbies that you want to get into this year? Some new things to kind of, what are some new hobbies you want to get into this year?
Yeah, I don't believe in resolutions, so I don't do that. I'm gonna
Well, that's
wait
why I
until the
didn't say
new year to
resolution.
try stuff.
I just had a new hobby that you would just want to
Yeah.
get into. Yeah.
I'm actually I'm really content with what I have. Actually, I would like to try ice climbing. I haven't gotten a chance to do that. I've wanted to do that for several years, and the trips that I've had lined up to go do that, the weather has never cooperated. And I don't have anything on the books for it this year, but maybe the next winter that would be something cool to go try. But it's been I think 2.5 years since I skydived. I would like to go skydiving again.
That's so fun. I've never done that. I've never skydived. I would do it, but I probably won't, but I would. I don't know. For me, the thing that I think is more or just as compelling because I'm also into animals and nature is I also kind of have a dark fascination with like scuba diving, even though I've never done that. The
It's
closest
fun.
thing, yeah, I'm sure it is. The closest thing is like snorkeling, like getting to see sea creatures and getting to have some interactions. That's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't I was scuba certified. I got scuba certified while I was on my second deployment, and I haven't been since I've been blind. But you know, I don't I mean the sensation of breathing underwater is neat. I just don't know that it's something that's not something that calls to me or anymore, but like the skydive for whatever reason falling out of a plane does. But I yeah, I think another thing I would really like to go I've gotten to do this just a little bit, but surfing. I don't get to do that very much because I live in Colorado. So not really a very easy thing to go do. But yeah.
Sure, 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 sure. No, I certainly understand. So Zach, you've done an incredible job. I must say, you're doing, you've been through, you know, you've been through an incredible, on one hand, I would tell you, man, you've been through an incredible obstacle, but you're doing incredibly well. And from my heart to yours, I know you're doing the best you can. And that's all you can ask for. You're clearly just living your life the very best way you possibly can now. And I think that speaks volumes, you know? Um, I'm sure you have some questions, some real hard-hitting questions for Aaron Richmond, right? Aaron's opinion, some stuff that you really want to know about me, right? What do you really want to ask me?
I don't know. I don't know that I have one. I feel that we've covered quite a bit tonight.
Right, sure. That's understandable. No worries. But I mean, do you have any questions just about me as a person or my own podcast or my own journey that maybe I didn't cover that you would really want to know? I mean, you can get all the way under my skin. Nothing will bother me, you know?
What do you do for work?
Sure. I asked you if you don't have questions and you could have asked. There you go. I had to squeeze it out of you. That was interesting. So
Well, I
I
thought you
am,
were trying to close up. So it sounded like you were trying to close the podcast. So I was trying to
well,
let you do that.
that's interesting. No, I'm gently walking towards the end of the conversation, slowing down the momentum by asking great questions to kind of bring it to a sense of resolution. Um, my academics were in the field of international relations. I am a bilingual guy. As I said, I speak English and French, and I am a ESL teacher online. I work for several companies teaching students all over the world online how to speak English as a second language. It's very rewarding and very challenging, and I've heard all sorts of silly and fascinating and sweet stories from all over the world. So yeah, that's what I do. Mhm.
Very unique. I like that. I love hearing when someone's kind of found their own path and you're not like, okay, I'm an accountant because it seemed like a job that a blind person could do, and not, I like that.
Well, let me tell you about accounting. I've heard people who talk about accounting, and none of them like that job. So I thought as a blind person,
Yeah.
since everybody hates accounting, I might as well start teaching.
Yeah. That's, I don't know if even sighted people like accounting. I'm
That's
sorry if you're the accountant right now that
Yeah,
is
what are
like
we going to do?
yelling at
Zach,
your
Zach,
phone.
what are we going to do if somebody's listening and they're an accountant and they love it? I mean, what are we going to do about that? What if I get some nasty comments on this one? Come on. I mean, who am I
Oh,
going to look to? I mean, come
some
on.
people probably think the same thing when I say that I like coding. I mean, I enjoy writing software, and some people are probably like, "Dear God, that would make me drink." But that's,
Well,
you know,
dear God, if I coded, I would have I would have a nice mango wheat beer. Or, if I coded, I guess I'd have to have a nice cappuccino or a beer with that. I guess if I coded, but I'll leave you to the coding, and I'm glad you do it. And seriously, keep up that great work because us blind people around the world, we really need that product from whatever it is to wherever it will go. Just keep on pushing all that possible as you do, as you've come up with that idea of pushing the boundary of possibility, and you do it so gracefully. So absolutely, man. Um, if someone wants to get in touch with you, Zach, how do they do it?
couple things. ZachTidwell.net is where my website is. You can reach out to me for speaking engagements, but I've got a contact form there, and most importantly, a mailing list, which this is not a spam list. I've had the list for over a year and haven't sent any emails out yet. This is just to keep people who want to know about the book up to date as there are developments with it being published. That's all it is. You will not receive anything else. But I'm also, if you Google me, you'll find me. But the podcast is Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell. That's also available everywhere. Those are the two big ones.
You certainly have the green light and support from Aaron's opinion. That's for sure. That's for sure. Are you planning on going on any other podcasts lately these days?
I've been doing quite a few. I think two that I just did came out this week. Got a couple more lined up, but it'll be more of a thing that I make a push for when the book is out or when it's coming out. So
Sure, sure. Well, again, honor to have you on the show. And as I say, you certainly have the support of the Aaron's Opinion family and me. As we say, certainly thank you for your service and for everything. And equally importantly, thank you for everything that you're doing for the future. I can tell that this tech product you're working on is going to help a lot of people get an education. And I think that is a huge, huge gift, huge, great way to give back. So going in blind, Zach Tidwell, man, thank you so much. And do you know how I end a great episode of Aaron's Opinion?
How?
That's fine. I say thank you so much and be well. Seriously, be well and have a good night. And we say, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow.